Welcome to episode 3 of our series, focusing on PD, Pastor David Shearer. In this episode, PD is going to relay memories from when he finished at Bible College, to moving down to London, and then on up to the Midlands and Coton Green. PD.
It seems such a long time ago since I was at Bible College, but one thing that taught me was that I wasn't there to be academically sort of sound and all the rest of it, but I was there to learn more about God and my relationship with Him. It was interesting to note that I was working alongside doctors, lawyers, potential pastors. Some had been to lots of Bible colleges before they came to ours. I made some lovely friends who I still keep in touch with. Some of them came from Norway, and only just a week ago I was in his company, and he was a Paralympic gold medalist, and he got the gold medal in swimming. He represented Norway also in weightlifting, and he also was involved in table tennis representing Norway. But it was swimming that he won the gold medal. He never spoke about it. He was quite humble about it. And that amazed me. I don't think while I was at college he ever spoke about his medal. And it was just lovely to have him as a friend. We made a covenant together with 2 other students to pray for each other all our life. And that's why we meet up every so often, to confirm that covenant we made before God. Our children know about it, and they also keep in touch, and they correspond with each other. I think it's now on Facebook and on WhatsApp or whatever it is they communicate on. They are so pleased to have had that union with us in Christ, serving God together. It was at the end of college that I had begun to think about, where's my future? And I didn't feel the call of God to go anywhere except going back to engineering and making my way forward and maybe helping in the church. It was quite a strange time. I was a little bit in limbo, but I knew God was with me whatever I did. And I could be used in the factory as well as in the pulpit. It was at this time my wife and I were thinking about getting married. Bobby was returning to London, and that's where I finally went. I tried to get jobs in Scotland. I could get a house, but I couldn't get a job. And the thing is this, that I walked around the different factories, and I walked around 18 factories in one day, and I couldn't even get a job sweeping the floors. So I came down to London, and this was 3 weeks before we get married, and we went, I lived in Bobby's parents' home for 2 of the weeks, and it was strange. It was no longer going to be, I can go back to my parents' home or I can do this. I was beginning to be a husband and to see the future together. We wondered where we were going to live. We didn't have any premises to live in, but we got married, and a friend booked us in at a hotel down at Lynmouth. And it was there when we went down there for our honeymoon that we arrived at the place, and I wasn't even sure if it was Lynmouth because there was no lights, there was no signs. I'd just come down a very steep hill, which is we now know as Porlock, which is a gradient of 1 in 3. And so it was quite a thing, and I was there and I could see the sea behind me, and I was sitting standing on a bridge just above a river, So I phoned the proprietor of the hotel and I said, I don't really know where I am, but I think I'm in Lynmouth. And he said, okay. He says, describe where you are. So I'm on a bridge over a river with the sea at my back and looking up towards the hills. He says, okay, you're 1 minute from the house. And he told me how to get there. And so I went and unloaded the car. I then asked, where can I park? He says, there's no parking here. You've got to go back the way you've come, and you park there and you can walk back again. So that's what I did. And when I got back to the hotel, there was Bobby in tears. I said, what's wrong? She says, I've just pulled the curtains off the wall. And it was, I just had a giggle to myself. I said, oh, don't worry about it, I'll soon fix it. And so we fixed it. I went out to the desk where the owner of the hotel was, and I said, can I pay for the digs? He said, he says, you can do it on Monday. I says, no, I want to give it to you now because I only had a few pounds. So he says, I'm giving you 10% discount because you were a Bible student. I says, okay. I says, but I've got a job now. He says, it doesn't matter, you've just come out of college, 10% discount. So shortly after that, he says, would you preach tomorrow? So I had to prepare that night and prepare for the sermon the next day. That was my day. That was where I began to realize God's got his hand on us. God's knowing what he's doing. And it's better that he knows what's happening, not me. When we came back from our honeymoon, we found out that the friends of ours had managed to get a flat for us. The flat consisted of one room and a kitchen. The sink in the kitchen was got a huge hole in it, and that was where we could wash and do the dishes. And Bobby was careful to pour the water down this sink, but not flood it with the water falling on the floor. That was a place where we stayed for a few months, and we looked for another place. And it was then that we were helping in this little mission, and there was a couple in that church who prayed for us up until they died. They prayed every day for Bobby and myself. And she was a lady who came from Aberdeen, and the husband came from London. It was during that time that various people were coming to us in this little church. We had various people that had been to Bible college, people looking for a call to the ministry and so on. And my friend and I had started a youth club, and we hired the local school, and we were getting young people in, and that was great. We also started working with another couple who were in Gunnersby, Martin Goldthorpe and Grace, his wife. He was a minister with the Come Back to God campaign, and later became the minister of Gunnersby Baptist. We worked together, and that was when I began to know about the healing and deliverance ministry. And it was quite a scary thing, quite an awesome thing, but it was where God was leading us at that time. And so we helped with the youth club, we helped with the youth in Hammersmith and Chiswick who were drug addicts. I would go out several nights a week with my friend, and we'd be witnessing to them and trying to encourage them. We took over an actual, like a cafe that was in a basement, and it was used as a drug den beforehand, and suddenly we took over, and it was there that we met some young people, needy young people, and some of them gave their hearts to the Lord. But during this time that I realized that I couldn't really bring up a child in Chiswick and Hammersmith easily, and we felt that we should move, and we bought a house in Hounslow. We managed to get a mortgage. That was a miracle in itself, and we were there, and it was God that was with us. And this minister heard that we were coming to Hounslow, and it was in his church that Bobby and I had got married, but from another minister taking the service, but they felt that I had a ministry. And so he told this other minister, who was a minister of a strict Baptist church in Hounslow, and he told him about us. Next thing he told us, would you come and consider being the assistant pastor of 2 churches? He says, we've just bought a church of the Salvation Army. He said, but there's only a few in the congregation. I said, well, I'm not looking for a ministry, but my friend is. And he got in touch with my friend to come and preach. He then came back to me and said, I want you to come and preach. So I went and preached. He said, we want you. I said, well, my friend's looking for the ministry. I'm not. And he says, would you come and preach again? And I said, okay. And I preached at a young people's weekend. And I preached it. Everything went wrong that weekend. I actually dropped all my notes. I was doing a visual aid, and they all fell to the ground. And then it came to the last hymn, and we said, I'm going to make an appeal, God, and it will tell me if it's of you or of me, because I'm not coming to this church unless a soul's saved. So that was my covenant before God. After the service, I asked people to consider giving their hearts to Christ, and there was 13 people responded. And so I tried to make it hard for them. I said, would you go home and write a letter to me that you want to become a Christian? And they wouldn't move. I said, go home and think about it and come back and tell me. They still wouldn't move. And then I said, I only want people to stay here if they really mean business with God. Well, they all stayed, nobody moved. So I called the deacons and their wives into this room, and they led them to the Lord. And I only led one person to Christ that day. But it was where God spoke to me that I had to rely on Him, not on my wisdom or clever. It's been able to be seeing He was in charge, and He can touch lives, whether we're weak or whether we're strong, whether we're wise or whether we're simple. And I relied on God again and again from that day on. It was at this church that I decided that would help. I said I would give them 2 years of my life to get the new church established. There was only 3 in the congregation. They had a youth group there, but there was no real sense of worship or musical instruments. So I started to teach the young people the guitar. I had 21 in the guitar group, and they brought their battered instruments with them, and I used to have to try and tune them up, and I never found it easy, but I would do it. We'd have some laughs and so on, but it grew. I had another youth group going, and we had 180 young people in a very short time. We trusted God in it. We seen it grow. We seen the congregation grow till there was about 30 in the congregation who were adults, and the rest were teenagers. And one time the teenager had been a bit noisy during the service, and there was more getting thrown out the door than was coming in at one time. But they soon learned that I meant business. we've seen souls saved and changed. At the same time, Bobby was quite ill, and she was on cortisone a lot, and she had her finger went almost gangrenous, and she went to the doctor, and she was in a lot of pain with it, and she went to the hospital, and the doctor in the middle of the corridor squeezed her finger, and all the pus was coming out and so on. Anyway, that night Bobby was still so upset with it. I prayed with her for healing. I hadn't done it before, but in a matter of days her finger was completely healed. And then there was another thing that I had a wart on my thumb, and it kept getting knocked in when I was in engineering, knocking it. And it was there, and it really annoyed me. And one day I just put my hands on it and I cursed it in the name of Jesus, and for me to be healed. And to this day, that wart's never come back. I still am free of it. The thing is that I began to think more about what God would have us do. And God, at that time, while Bobby was in hospital, she was expecting Debbie, and she was in there, her blood pressure was very low and so on, so they brought her in to keep an eye on her. And while she was there, the doctor said, "Are you allergic to anything?" She says, "I'm allergic to iron and tablets and injections." He says, "Okay, but you'll be all right, this is a new one." And he gave her the injection, and she went into the bathroom there, and they found her collapsed on the floor, her throat almost dying. And this woman went into the bathroom, and she and called for the nurses to come quick. They got her into bed, and I went in to visit her there at the ward, and they had got the screens round her. I'd never been to see any of my children born, because in those days they didn't do it. You didn't allow it. So I said, "Is the baby due now?" And they turned round and they said, "We're fighting for your wife's life or your baby's life." And he says, "Well, it'll be one or the other." And I says, "I'm fighting for both." And that was our daughter, Debbie. She came through it, Bobby came through it, and we knew that God's hand was on it. At the same time, God spoke to me that I have to move out of London. And when you've just got a good job, I was working for London Transport at the time, and Bobby had just had a baby quite near her family, but at the same time God said, "We have to move." And Bobby had heard from the Lord at the same time that we have to move out of London. It was then that we started praying, and in that praying we found that where to go. And there was a notice in London Transport's notice board. There was a job in the Midlands. It was to come and to work on the first automatic train in the world, and that was up at Metro Camel in Birmingham, Washwood Heath. So they wanted someone with about 20 odd years experience. Well, I only had 2 years experience with London Transport at the time, although I had been promoted in it. In London Transport, here was another job that I felt I could do. The interview was very good, and I was asked all the questions that I would love to ask myself, and I got the job. And it was great, and as much as this was a sign from the Lord, and I said if I got the job, I would move up lock, stock and barrel, and I got it. And we moved, and we were living in the same street that we came up here to Tamworth in, and ready to do God's will.